Alright, this is part 4 of this video on how to adjust the valve clearances on a Honda Prelude. Just to review where we're at, the valves are all adjusted now. We've gone through each one of the cylinders, adjusted the valves on the intake and on the exhaust side, and now all we have to do is make sure that the lock nuts for the adjustment screws are set to the correct torque, and then reassemble everything that we put apart. Set the torque. You're going to need a torque wrench, and the torque that's recommended by Honda is 13 foot-pounds or 25 newton meters. Quick word about torque wrenches. If you're serious about working on an engine at all, this is definitely a tool that you should invest in. In general, like with most things, you get what you pay for, and you want to spend the money on a good torque wrench. Quite literally buy the best one that you can afford, and it will last you a long time. The reason to get a good quality one is just that the cheaper ones tend not to keep their calibration or even be calibrated correctly out of the factory. Another thing to know about them, when you're done using, always set them back to their lowest setting or to 0, and so that the tension in the spring inside isn't kept tight while it's just being stored, which will kind of wreck the calibration. Other thing to know about them, you never want to drop them or do anything like that, or use them as a breaker bar. This is a tool that you are gentle with as much as possible. I'm using a click type torque wrench. There's a lot of different types. The click type is handy because it acts like a ratchet and gives a click sound when you've reached the correct torque. I have read that the other types, like the deflection beam ones and things like that, are more accurate in the long term, and they hold their calibration longer. But for the sake of usability, this is the kind I decided to get, and I think that for most, certainly home mechanic type uses, this is the one that you'll see the most common. Anyway, I'm going to move the camera and we'll get right into the adjustment. Once again, 13 foot-pounds is what we're going to be tightening these lock nuts to. Alright, nothing to this really. We've got 16 lock nuts, one for each valve, and we just need to go through them and make sure that they're all at the correct torque. Torque wrench goes on, brace it with your hand so that the torque is transferred directly down into the nut, and twist until you get the click out of the torque wrench. And we want to do that for each one of them. So there, those ones are good. Click. Make sure that, and we're just going to do each one, make sure that they're all set to the correct torque so that one of them doesn't loosen off while the engine is running. I'm going to complete the remainder of the 16, and then I'll start briefing you on how to put the rest of the engine back together. Okay, next thing we got to do is we got to get the spark plugs back in that we took out. No trick to that. Just take the spark plugs, remember they go back in the same order. Good idea to just insert them into the spark plug socket without the ratchet driver on it. Then you can just, with your fingers, gently thread each one into the threads. Make sure that you're not cross-threading them at all. And then just sink them down. And remember, we don't want to put them in too tightly, so once you feel them at the bottom, grab your ratchet driver and just little bit of snug, and then just let them be. And that's it. So I'm going to put the other 3 in and then move on to the next step of reassembly. Okay, spark plugs back in, so now we can put the valve cover back on the engine. Before you do, grab the valve cover, take a quick look around the entire outside of it, make sure that the gasket is in good condition, no cracks or anything, and free of any sort of debris, and seated in its little groove correctly, just so that when you put it down, you don't want it to pinch out or just get out of line or anything like that. We don't want to create any oil leaks. Also make sure that the seals around the spark plug holes are also in good shape. Nothing to it to put it on, just line it up carefully as best you can. Don't want any dirt or anything like that, and just hold it and slip it back underneath that wiring harness. That'll be the hardest part. And then just gently lower it down onto the engine like so. It should sit right in place. So now what we're going to do, now that that's on there, we're going to take our small little washers that are meant for the valve cover, pop them back on, and then each nut goes back on. We tighten each one of those down. Remember, there's the bolt one that goes there, there's the bolt one that goes underneath the harness, and then the nuts that go around, and there's also the spark plug clasp like this that gets bolted here. But before you tighten it down, get in there, take a quick look around the entire thing and make sure that everything is seated nicely and that the dust cover for the timing belt is also seating well against and that nothing is pinched underneath there. So I'm going to tighten each one of these down and then we'll go on to the next step. Okay, the valve cover is bolted back on now, so now we can get the harness with the wires for the alternator back in place. Just pull that wire back through that we threaded and make sure that harness gets seated down into the valve cover nicely. Then there was a bolt that goes in here. Tighten that down with a ratchet. And then a washer and a nut that went on the main lead for the alternator. Get in there, get that back on. Once that's back on, all you have to do is get the spark plugs back in, put your driver's side wheel back on, reconnect the battery, and you'll be ready to go. I'm just now doing up the nut on the main lead on the alternator. That's good there. Tighten it down with a ratchet so we have good contact. Slip the boot back on. So that no water gets in there. And insert the main plug. And put the boot back on for the alternator. Okay, so that about wraps it up. Like I said, spark plugs go back in, wheel goes back on, and then hook your battery back up, drop the car back on the ground. Start it up, listen to your engine. It should sound a little better, hopefully, now that the valves are adjusted. There'll be less clicking noises or anything like that coming from the engine. Thanks for watching. If you need any help with this or other projects on your Honda Prelude, please visit PreludeDriver.com, and the people there will be happy to help you out. Once again, thank you, and a big shout out to all the Prelude owners out there, and drive safe. Okay, thanks.